I'm Vanessa Francis and welcome to class time. Today we continue with persuasive writing. Remember, you can use the various social media platforms for questions or comments. Now, my question to you is, how do you craft a persuasive essay? Let's get into it. So, of course, we need to look at our objectives. So, the first thing we need to do is be able to analyze features of persuasive writing. You will also be able to distinguish among the different parts of the persuasive essay. And finally, you'll be able to discuss various strategies to use in approaching writing a persuasive essay. So notice the term was used, crafting the persuasive essay, because that is what you're doing. You're building something, you're creating something. So you by now should become a master craftsman. Now, I'm going to show you two pictures, and I want you to look carefully at both of them and answer a particular question that I will ask you. Which one would you prefer? Which one would you choose? And why would you choose it? Ready for the picture? So here we have two structures. They should be houses. One looks like the average house. The other looks a little interesting. So notice this one. Compare it to the other one. Which of these do you believe is the better crafted structure? Why do you believe your choice is a better crafted structure? Now, for most, if not all of you, I'm sure you chose the house that is white because you can clearly see what is going on. It makes sense how it is structured. The other one, we are not sure where you enter, where you exit. We're not sure how the floors are set up. We're not really sure what exactly is going on. Now, the idea is when you are building your persuasive essay, you are trying to create this, something that makes sense, something that is logical, something that the average audience member can understand easily. When you create this, it's very unusual, yes, and maybe that's what you wanted, but it's not about what you want. It's about the aim of your essay, which is to persuade people to join you. So if your audience cannot understand what exactly is going on in your essay, then right there, how are you going to persuade them? So keep that in mind as we go through this. So the blueprint, because that's where you start when you're building something. You start with a blueprint, a plan. So the first thing you have to do, of course, read your question carefully. So whatever question you get, you have to read it. Take the time to read it. And you're reading to pick out your key words, your key expressions. What is it that you should focus on as you start writing? Now, after you have read it, you need to brainstorm your ideas. But I caution you, don't just brainstorm the for or brainstorm the against. Even though the question, you might have a particular preference. You might want to support it or you might want to oppose it. But the thing is, you need to think about both sides because it happens sometimes. You want to support it, but when you write down the ideas, you realize I don't have as many ideas to support it as I do to oppose it. So even though you might like one side or the other, approach it objectively. Look at both sides carefully. So after you have done that, the next thing you need to do now, get your supporting details for the points. Again, for the same reason. You might have 3 points each, but when it's time to support these points, you might fall short on one side more than the other side. Of course, after you have done all of that now, you need to review them. Look at them critically now. So you have your points to support, you have your points to oppose, you have supporting details for each side. Now it is time to be honest with yourself. Which set of points is the stronger set of points? Which one should you really pursue in writing the essay? And after you have done all that, then it is very easy now for you to choose a stance, because you have to pick a side. You have to either be supporting it or opposing it. So even if you're told a scenario like give your views, you still have to be leaning towards one side more than the other. So your audience must know, is this person trying to convince me to go with this side, or is this person trying to convince me to go against this side? So even if you're going to bring in both sides of the story, one side must be the obviously stronger side. So these are some questions you would need to ask yourself before you start writing. What is my contention? Basically, this translates to, where do I stand on this issue? And you have to ask yourself, why? So where do you stand on the issue, and why do you stand that way? So your main contention is basically going to be phrased as a firm statement. So your stance must be projected in a firm manner, in an authoritative manner. You shouldn't be asking what your stance is. You are telling us what your stance is. And this will be the foundation of your argument. And what it will also be is the basis for your thesis. Remember now, you need to have a thesis statement. This is what sums up the entire essay. This is what tells us what exactly it is you'll be doing with your essay. So you need to make sure your contention is clear. You need to make sure that you have firmly stated it. And you also need to ensure that you have incorporated it into your thesis statement, because that is what will project what is going to happen in the rest of the essay. Now here's a tip. You need to, of course, make sure that you are persuading others to agree with you. That is the whole point of this essay that you're writing, to persuade people. So make sure that you can show that you know quite a lot about the issue. So whatever you are going to write about, you need to have certain basic information. And notice the last thing, stay informed. Now, you can never know what the question will be about. So the best way to prepare is to keep yourself abreast of everything that is going on. So again, you're going to be hearing me say you need to read a lot. So you need to be informed, you need to have a wide knowledge base. So it's good to know a little about a lot. So don't just say, because I like sports, I only read about sports. Your question might not have anything to do with sports. Just because you like crime, your question might not have anything to do with crime. So you need to know a little bit about a lot of topics. So as you go through your day, take some time and just browse something new, something different. Be informed. So your next question, who is my audience? And this one is very important, because you need to know, who are you addressing your argument to? Now, yes, in an exam situation, the audience is really limited to the person marking your exam. However, that person is representing the audience that you're given in the scenario. So based on this scenario, who are you writing for? And that should guide you in how to write. So each type of audience is going to respond to different stimuli. Now, think of it now. If your audience is supposed to be a school official, then of course you know that you'll need to incorporate things that are relevant to the education scenario. If your audience is supposed to be, say, a lawmaker, somebody who is in charge of making certain decisions on a national level, then you have to shift your mindset now. What should appeal to somebody in that perspective? So you need to know who your intended audience is, and based on who your intended audience is, then you'll know how to get into your persuasive writing, you'll need to know what to do and how to go about doing it. What will appeal to this particular type of person? Now, of course, we went through a gamut of persuasive techniques, and as a result, you are now equipped to decide which one of these, which group of these, which set of these devices can I use in this particular scenario. So you'll know if you're writing to someone who is in a certain capacity that requires emotion, then you know all the devices that appeal to emotion, those are the ones you should really bring out. If it is somebody who is more rational and logical, more analytical, more calculating, then you have to use those devices that appeal to that type of person. So based on the wealth of devices you have been exposed to, you now narrow it down to which ones are the most appropriate for this type of audience. Next question, what is my form? And I don't mean the form you're in at school. That one is not it. Form meaning, what scenario were you given, and based on that scenario, what format should your essay take? Sometimes you're asked to write a letter to the editor. Sometimes you're asked to do a commentary. Sometimes it's just an essay. Sometimes it's a letter to anybody at all. Sometimes the letter is addressed to somebody specific. And sometimes, not so often in the last few days, but sometimes you're asked to write a speech. So based on what form your essay should take, that again will guide you in what you do in the essay. So another tip, you need to be familiar with various structures, because in order to handle anything that is thrown at you, you need to have adequate practice in a wide range of things. So you can't just limit yourself to only one format. You need to understand how to handle yourself in various formats so that whatever you get on the day of reckoning, you are comfortable with it because you have had enough practice with it. Another important question, what tone should you use? And we talked about tone recently. So what personal feelings are you going to be displaying about this issue? And again, your tone will be guided by the questions asked before. Who is going to? What your stance is? What type of issue are you talking about? So the mood or the feeling you convey is your tone. And it is a good way to show your readers your personal attitude to the issue. Now again, you might have had to pick the side that you weren't necessarily on prior to. However, that is no excuse to drop the ball now. So even though your attitude might not be one that was very supportive of the side you have chosen to do, still come out strong. Let it sound as if this is what you were born believing and you continue to believe up to that moment. Another tip, avoid being abusive or defamatory. Now, you don't want to alienate anyone. Remember, you're trying to persuade. So if you come off overly aggressive, overly abusive, overly insulting, then what you will end up doing is alienating some of the very people who were on your side all along. You might not be abusive towards them specifically, but the tone that you have taken is distasteful to them. So even though they agreed with your point, the way you are bringing it across is what is turning them off. So you need to be very careful. Your next question that you need to ask, have I considered the counter arguments? These are the things that would go against the stance you have chosen. And you have to consider that. And again, you consider that because if I believe A, B, and C, and somebody else believes X, Y, and Z, I need to know why they believe this. I need to know how I can address the fact that they believe that instead of what I believe. So your tip here, you might want to include the counter arguments in your arguments. And here's what you're going to do. The audience now gets the idea that you're being very unbiased. So because you're showing how other people might think about your issue, you are showing that you can reason it out, and you have reasoned it out. And because you have reasoned it out, this is the conclusion you have drawn. So your audience now says, okay, this person has thought about both sides and decided to go with this one, even though there are issues out there against them. Another thing you can do, you can start off with the counter argument, or you can finish with the counter argument. So it's up to you where it is to be placed. Be strategic about it. So you can open with it and then guide your audience to your point, or you can establish your point and then just throw it in to show that I understand that there are people who think otherwise, but still, let's stay on this side. The next question for you to ask, am I adopting a persona? So again, this goes back to the scenario you are given. In that scenario, are you supposed to be writing as a specific type of person? So are you still going to be that grade 9, 10, 11 student? Or are you supposed to be the member of a particular community? Are you supposed to be the member of a particular organization? So you need to know, am I supposed to adopt a particular persona? And therefore, you'll understand what you need to do as that person. So even if you're presenting your personal views, you can express it by adopting an imaginary persona. So even if you're not asked to do so, you can still go ahead and create a persona for yourself. And again, creativity is encouraged as long as it doesn't go too far out of the box. Do not go so far that you can no longer see the box. Think outside the box, but stay in the vicinity of the box, because the box is your reference point. Now that we have the blueprint, we're ready to start building. And this is a focus question we'll be using to guide us as we build. So, physical education should be a compulsory course for all students at all secondary institutions. Write an essay of 250 to 300 words, giving your views. So keep that in mind as we go through this building process. So we have the blueprint. Now we are going to start with the foundation, which is your introductory paragraph. What are the functions of this? First function, as you should understand, you're going to introduce the topic. That's what it does. It's an introductory paragraph, so you're introducing the topic. So you're letting your reader know what it is you're going to be writing about. I'm going to caution you later, something you should not write in there though. Of course, in this introductory paragraph, you're going to clearly state your position. So at the end of your introduction, your audience must know if you're on side A or you are on side B. There should not be any cloud in the mind. There should not be any misunderstanding as to which side you stand on. And of course, in the introduction, you're going to provide at least 3 points that you're going to develop in the body. Remember now, your introduction is the appetizer. Your introduction is the foundation. So if you have a strong foundation, as with any structure, then you have what to build on. But if your foundation is weak, then it stands to reason the rest of your essay is going to be shaky. So you want to ensure that your introduction covers all the bases. You lay a set foundation that the rest of the essay will just flow from. So please make sure you practice writing good introductions. So here are the features now of this paragraph. So of course, it must be short and to the point. It is not the body of the essay. So you're not going to make it too long. You're going to make it short, but it must do what it is necessarily to do. Avoid getting into the meat of the essay. So you're not going to start discussing your points in the intro. You're just going to let us know what the points are in the intro. So the discussion, the development should not happen here. And of course, you're just giving your audience a concise idea of what the essay will be about. Again, it's an introduction. So it's like a preview. So you're just giving us a snippet, a little something to intrigue us, to get us interested, and then we read now to get into the details of it. So don't get into too many details here. just enough to let us know what is coming later on, and just enough to let us understand where you stand. So, one very necessary part of your introduction is the attention-grabbing opening statement. The very first sentence you put on the paper to get us into it. So of course, as the name suggests, it grabs the audience's attention. So from the get-go, you have given us something to say, interesting. I need to see what's coming next. The next thing is going to pique our interest. So you're going to stimulate our thoughts. This statement must be something that causes us now to start thinking about what it is your essay is going to be about, what it is you're going to say next, what it is you're going to be talking about. So this statement is very important. And unfortunately, sometimes it's very difficult to get this statement out. But I would tell you, you can draft the essay and then leave the space for that and then just put it in as it comes to you. So please don't spend half an hour just thinking about this. You can get into it when you're drafting, when you're outlining, and then after you have looked over, then you can think about what you can use. Now, this statement does not have to explicitly relay your position. So the statement doesn't have to right off the bat let us know that you're on side A or side B. Really and truly, remember, it is supposed to grab our attention. So it can do that, but it doesn't have to do that. It just needs to relate to whatever it is you're going to be talking about. So here are the 3 types that are the most common. So there are other types, but these are the 3 most common and, quite frankly, 3 more effective ones. So you have the general statement, you have the question, and you have the quotation or reference. So those are the 3 we'll be looking at. Now, the general statement, as the name suggests, is a declarative sentence. So you're making a statement. You're just saying something. You're not asking any questions. You're not doing anything. You're just making a statement. Now, of course, it must be thought-provoking because remember we said, it's the attention-grabbing opening. So it must somehow provoke your reader to start thinking about what is coming. So here are some examples you can look at. Again, we're using the same question. So here's one. There is absolutely no doubt that physical education should be made compulsory for all students. So that one you have actually stated where you're going with it. And nothing is wrong with that. You have just made a general statement. The second one. It is highly improbable that mandatory physical education will enhance the lives of all students. So right there, we kind of have an idea that you're going to go against the idea of physical education being compulsory. And this last one now, the question of whether physical education should be compulsory for all students is one that has boggled the mind for eons. Now this one might be the best to use because it doesn't pick a side as yet. It just opens you up to the idea that this is an issue that we need to think about, and this is an issue that we need to decide on. So that one might be the best one to use for that reason. It doesn't already pin you one side or the other. It gives you the time, the chance to show that you're going to be looking at this critically, you're going to be looking at this analytically. So our next type, the question. And of course, if you're using a question, then what kind of question will it be? A rhetorical question. And we looked at how to use a rhetorical question earlier. So you're going to take your audience to the heart of the issue very quickly. That is the nature of a rhetorical question. Now here are some examples. So is there really any doubt that physical education should be made compulsory for all students? Are we really holding fast to the belief that mandatory physical education will enhance the lives of all students? And for how much longer will the question of whether physical education should be compulsory for all students continue to boggle our minds. So think about those as we do this. It is time for our break, but stay put. In another minute or so, we'll be back with a lot more. Welcome back to class. Or persuade. So let's continue our look at crafting the persuasive essay. So we paused while looking at how to open with a question. And of course, you notice the first two questions each take a particular side, whereas the last question takes a more open side. So that one is one that you could consider doing. Have a more open question and then show that you plan to explore the either and the or. So the next way you can open is by using a reference or a quotation. Of course, this would be something relevant, so it has to tie into your topic. So please don't just take any random one. It must tie into your topic in some way. And it can come from just about anywhere. So you can take it from a poem, from a song, from an individual. In fact, you can be the individual to make one up as well. Shh. Now, what this does, it creates a reference point for your audience. So you start with a quotation, so they start thinking about what exactly is going to happen. How does this quotation tie into what you're going to do? So here are some examples. First one, you have to exercise, or at some point you'll just break down, encourages former United States President Barack Obama. So right there you have used a quotation from somebody who many people can identify with. Another example, I believe that every human has a finite number of heartbeats. I don't intend to waste any of mine running around doing exercises, says former man on the moon, Neil Armstrong. So those who are science inclined will know who Neil Armstrong is. As the name suggests here, the man on the moon. The last example now. We can know all there is to know about the body and how it works. How that benefits us is another issue entirely, is the view held by many. Now again, you notice each of the first two, they picked a side. However, the last one, again, leaves it more open for discussion. And again, the last one might be something you want to use to show that you are being objective. And notice it just says a view held by many, because this would be a case where no one specifically said it, but you just phrased it that way. So now let's look at another important sentence in your introduction, the thesis statement. So you must have a really good opening statement that grabs attention, and you must have a thesis statement. So this now is one or sometimes two sentences, and it encapsulates the main point, the main idea, or the main message. This is why you need to have it there. This is what tells your audience exactly what you plan to focus on. So it is going to be addressed in the body, it is going to be defended in the body, and you're going to reiterate this in the conclusion. So again, it is important that you have your thesis because it forms part of the framework of this foundation that you are building. Now, there are some things you need to avoid. Pay close attention. So, avoid using vague or general words like interesting or negative. Try to use specific language. So when you're crafting your thesis, try not to be too open. Remember now, your thesis is supposed to point in a specific direction. So you want to ensure that after you have built up your thesis, we're clear as to what you plan to do. Try not to use technical language that will confuse your reader. So we discussed the use of jargon, and jargon is wonderful, but not for your thesis. You want to make your thesis as universally understood as possible. And don't merely announce the topic. So in your thesis, don't just say mandatory physical education classes are bad. Try to avoid doing that. No, try not to oversimplify an issue that is complicated. So you don't want to make it too simple and then you lose the very essence of it. So what you might want to do is break it into smaller parts and examine the smaller parts. Now, you want to make sure that your thesis provides well thought out reasons for your claim, because if this is your thesis, that means this is what you believe. And if this is what you believe, there must be reasons why you believe this. So make sure that your thesis covers the reasons why you believe or the reasons why you're taking a particular side. And of course now, you need to remember what you want to write about. It is something debatable, but you don't want to make it more complex. You don't want to overthink it. You don't want to overcomplicate it. So even though you don't want to simplify it too much, on the flip side, you don't want to make a simple issue too complicated either. So strike a balance. Next thing you don't want to do, you don't really want to just report something everybody already knows. If we already know it, then why are you trying to convince us? So try to avoid doing that. You want to make your ideas more open, so expand them and make sure that you create the debate, create the argument. Now, for the thesis specifically, do not use another person's quotation. Remember, the thesis is basically coming out of you. It is your personal stance, what you personally believe. So try not to just pull in the quotations here. Leave that for the rest of the essay. And avoid cliches in the thesis. So we talked about using cliches in the body. You can use it in the introduction, but do not use it in your thesis statement. So you want to make sure that your thesis sounds original, it sounds fresh. Your creativity is at work here. So you are the master of your thesis. Now, again, avoid announcing the thesis statement. So earlier I said, avoid these expressions. This essay will cover. I am writing this essay too. Please treat them as the vilest sins known to man. Nowhere in your essay should you be writing about, in this essay I am going to talk about. Avoid it like the plague, I beg of you. So let's go over the things you need for your introductory paragraph. So, be concise. Remember, it is the introduction, it is not the body. So it needs to be concise, you need to get to the point. You're not going to go into details because that is what the body is for. You need at least about 50 words. And in your introduction, ensure you do these three things. You introduce your topic, you state your position, And of course, you provide your reasons. So that was the foundation. The next step in our building is the rooms. So we had a blueprint, we built the foundation, now we're ready to build up the rooms. And the rooms are the body paragraphs. So now, for each of these, you want to ensure that your viewpoint is clearly stated in a topic sentence. So in your introduction, you wanted a thesis that would control the entire essay. But for each body paragraph, you want a controlling topic sentence. So something that tells you what this particular paragraph is going to focus on. Now, your voice, your author's voice, it must be active and it must be assertive. So it shouldn't sound like you're questioning yourself. It must be authoritative. Remember, once you exude confidence in what you're saying, then your audience can also have confidence in what you're saying. And if the audience is confident in what you're saying, then of course we're more likely to take your side. But if you don't sound like you believe yourself, then how is it that we are to believe you? So your focus must be on making logical arguments. Your arguments have to make sense. You can't be putting across an argument that you can't see how 1 + 1 = 10, 11, or 12. I don't want any math teachers beat me up, So make sure 1 + 1 adds up to 2. Now, you want to rely on facts and you want to base these on valid evidence. So granted, in a pinch, you might have to create your own evidence, but please make sure it sounds factual. So you want it to be as close to actual fact as possible. So you don't want to be too outlandish in giving your evidence. And of course, it is always good to quote some sources to establish authority. So right there we know this is not just coming off the top of your head. This is something that other people support as well. Other notable people support as well. And because other notable people support it, so can we. So keep those in mind. So continuing our look. You want to ensure that your main points are supported. And how do you support them? With illustrations, with examples, with logic, with analogy, with comparison. Hint, hint, use your persuasive techniques. Now, this is very important in the body. You want to stay focused on your point. So you don't want to go off tangent. You don't want to end up introducing some things that don't quite apply, because that right there will weaken your argument. And the whole point is you're trying to convince us. So if you're leading us down road A, all this time you're building and building, and then all of a sudden you make a U-turn and gone in a totally different direction, then you're going to lose us, because right there we're going to be confused and we will look like one of those houses that we looked at in the beginning that really didn't quite make sense. That is what you're trying to avoid. So ensure that you focus on the point you're making. Now, you're going to give some consideration to alternative viewpoints, but you must lead it back to what you have to say. So you can use alternative viewpoints to strengthen what you are saying about your viewpoint. Keep that in mind. The whole idea is you're trying to build this structure that we will choose to live in. So, how do you go about organizing it now? So you're going to develop each point in a separate paragraph. So we don't want any dual purpose rooms. One point in this paragraph, a separate point, separate paragraph. Remember, you're supposed to think of at least 3. You can have more than 3 if time will allow, but no fewer than 3. And of course, it is always advisable to start from your strongest point and then work your way down to your weakest point. And this is good for various reasons. And the most obvious reason should be occurring to you right now. You have a time limit working with in the exam. So if you start with your strongest point and heaven forbid you run out of time, then your strongest point would already be on the paper, and you can get more marks for that than you would if you had the weakest point on the paper first. So practice starting off with the strongest one and then working your way down to the weakest one, and then you conclude, and wonderful. Now you need to establish a flow from one paragraph to the next. And what you're going to do is use up your transitional words and phrases. So it's always a good idea to finish one paragraph, somewhat introducing the next one. So use your transitions. So you either finish one, introducing the next one, or you start one picking up from the one before. But you want to make a seamless flow. We shouldn't have a bumpy ride. We shouldn't have to be climbing any steps where there should be none. When you're walking from one room to the next, you just pass through a doorway. Not true. So you want to make sure that in passing from one room to the next, you're not tripping over anything and you're not falling into any sinkholes that you never really expected. So we had our blueprint, we had our foundation, we looked at the rooms, so of course now we need to cap it off. So our roof is our concluding paragraph. What does it do? It summarizes the argument. So after we have read everything, some things we might have slipped, So this is the paragraph that reminds us what we read about already. So you're going to make sure you summarize your argument, and of course you are finishing it up now. You're finishing strong enough. Now it's going to relate the main ideas that you had in the body. So in this summary, you must make sure you point out the main ideas that you had developed already to remind us again of what you talked about. And of course, even though we should know by now, in this paragraph, you need to reaffirm your stance. So this is where you remind us of the side that you are on. So you're going to make sure you summarize and conclude. You're going to make sure that you restate the ideas you had presented already. And of course, you need to make sure you remind us of what exactly you were trying to do. Were you on side A or were you on side B? So, looking at the finishing touches. Now remember, in crafting your essay, you don't want to go overboard at any given point. So now that you have more or less built the structure, there are certain things you need to do to finish it off. So when you're building a house, you put in your cement, your steel, whatever the materials are, you've built it. You put on the roof, hopefully a secure roof so you don't have any threats of rain wetting up everything in there. You also want to make sure that you make it aesthetically appealing, right? So you're going to paint it up. You're going to put little finishing touches all over to make it appealing to the eye. And that is the same thing you need to do for your essay. So after you have made this very strong essay, because by now it would have been very strong, you still need to go over it and look at different details that you need to improve on. So these are our finishing touches. So here's a checklist of questions that you need to go through to review. So the first question, did I clearly express my stance on the topic or issue? So when you're reading over, is it clear to you, even though you wrote it, is it really clear to you what your stance is? Is it clear that you are on this side or you are on that side? The next question, did you support your stance with valid reasons? So yes, you have a stance, but is it well supported? Have you given us enough reasons to take your side? Remember, we said it already. You cannot assume that your reader agrees with you. You cannot assume that the reader is on your side. You have to take the approach that this person is on the opposite side and you're trying to bring them into the fold. So you have to make sure that the reasons you have put forward are solid. The reasons that you have given are supported. Did you present supporting evidence for the reasons? So again, you can't just expect us to come with you just because you say so. So this is what I believe and you must believe it to full stop. No, it doesn't work like that. You have to have supporting evidence. So it's time for another quick break. Class time continues after these messages. Welcome back to Persuasive Writing Part 5. We have covered a lot in the persuasive writing essay, so let's finish up. So we're at the point where we're doing the aesthetics now. We're looking at the finishing touches. We have looked at the blueprint, how you're going to organize it. We have looked at your foundation, which is your intro. We have looked at the body, which makes up the different rooms in your structure. And we also looked at how you cover it up with your conclusion. So we're continuing now with our checklist of the things you need to ask yourself before you say it is done. So next question, did I use a variety of persuasive techniques? Now this is a very important question to ask because remember you are being marked specifically for that. So you want to ensure that you really did use up a variety of techniques. You can't just use one or two over and over and over again. We had 3 whole lessons on techniques and there are actually still even more out there. So you want to ensure that you utilize a variety all along. The next question, did I use appropriate language structures to connect ideas? Remember, it is an English exam. So of course you want to make sure that the ideas are connected. We talked about using your transitions. So your transitional phrases that flow from one paragraph to the next and inside each paragraph from one idea to the next, one sentence to the next. A very important question. Does this make sense? This requires you to be very critical now because in your mind you might be saying, but I wrote it, so of course it makes sense. Take yourself out of that space. Again, remember, you're writing for somebody who does not necessarily agree with you. So try to be that person when you're looking back. Did it make sense to include this point here? Should I have included it somewhere else? Did it make sense to write it this way? Should I have written it another way? So you need to ask that question and be honest with your answer. Does it make sense? Another very important question. Am I convinced? Now, if you were on the flip side, We discussed that in another lesson. What are some of the things somebody would have to say or do in order for you to be convinced? So when you're looking back at your essay, again, put yourself in that person's shoes. If you did not believe this was the case, would what you have on the paper have convinced you adequately to join this side? You need to think about it. Now, you have to ask the next question. Will this convince an audience? So if you have looked critically and asked if it would convince you, then you're halfway to answering the question, would it convince anybody else? Because you would have thought about who it is targeting and what you would need to say to that person. And therefore, you should have a positive answer to this one. Will they understand my values and agree with my evidence? So this would require you to have put it forward very clearly. You would have had to make sure that there is no ambiguity in what you said. There was nothing that might have been mistaken in any way. You did not use any misleading statements. And if you avoided all of that, then of course they should, as rational thinking people, understand your values. And if you have used up persuasive devices effectively, then of course they would agree with your evidence and agree with you as well. Next question. Did I show that I have a thorough knowledge of the issue and understanding in the main argument around it? So have you shown that you know what you're talking about? Remember, confidence is key. You want to ensure that when you have finished writing, the confidence you have in what you have said shows up clearly. There should be no doubt that you know what you're talking about. You believe what you're talking about. Did I develop my argument logically and coherently? Again, going back to the whole idea of the finished structure making sense. So your argument needed to be developed in a manner that made sense. It made sense to start with this, move to that, finish. It didn't make sense to build one room here and then cut another room on top of it and then go around the back and build another room. So we want to make sure everything is in a logical sequence. Did I substantiate my argument with up-to-date evidence? So you don't want to be using evidence from 19 when. We are in 2021. So any evidence you use must be something fairly current. And very important, did I acknowledge my sources of evidence? So quotations, facts, statistics. So did you credit your sources of information? So if you brought out some statistics, who you got it from? Did you get it from a newspaper? Did you get it from an authority figure? You have to say who gave you that idea that 65% of people believe that physical education should be mandatory. And then, of course, make sure that the publication or broadcast details are relevant. Again, you want to choose relevant sources. You don't want a source that has nothing to do with the issue at all. You want to have sources that are actually specifically relevant to what you're doing. So if it's a medical issue, some doctors of medicine. If it is a financial issue, you can have some doctors of finance. So make sure your sources are relevant. Did you summarize your argument in the conclusion? That is necessary. Remember, you want to leave us remembering what you talked about. And remember, it is in an English exam, so you have to make sure that you check carefully for errors in grammar, usage, mechanics, and spelling. You're being graded for all of that. Homework time! Yay! So, here is a question that you should work on. The homeless who roam the streets are a nuisance. They should be forced into special housing provided by the government. My word, that's a touchy issue. And you have your parameters there. So work on this for your homework. And of course, happy building. So that's all the time we have for today. As usual, you can catch a repeat of today's lesson on JNN at 5 p.m. Class time continues tomorrow with CSEC Math. Until then, keep safe.
Hi there, I'm Simon Preston from TVJ. Thank you very much for watching our YouTube channel. To see our latest videos and also to see live events, click here. To see our full videos on onespotmedia.com, click here. Thank you very much for watching.